Welcome to this, the second in the Absa Insights series. Premeshin Naidoo is the head of telecommunications, media and technology at Absa Corporate and Investment Bank. And I don't know if you've noticed how many times, hopefully you have, the pavement outside your house has been dug up by one or other telecommunications company laying fibre to the home. You would think that once the holes were dug, 10 people would have come past instead of 10 people coming past at different times. Why is it that nobody plans this stuff properly, Premeshin? I mean, we've had this wonderful fibre revolution in South Africa, yet we've had to endure the most extraordinary logistical messes as these companies have thrown their wires in all over the place.
Good day to you, Bruce, and thank you for the opportunity to be chatting. You've touched on an interesting point, because the reality is that at the end of the day, this is a land grab, right? The guy who gets his fibre down in the pavement first has got a strategic advantage, okay? The challenge, though, is from an economic efficiency perspective, does it make sense for a second, third, fourth provider to be laying fibre down the same street? And I think therein lies the challenge. So it's a challenge for the municipalities, because it's their pavements and other services that's being disruptive when a spade goes through an electrical cable or through a water pipe. But also for the operators, at some point it becomes capital inefficient and certainly economic inefficient for the country to have multiple providers down the same street.
Wouldn't it have been better for everybody, had Telkom had the capacity 20 years ago, to simply put in the network, put in the skeleton that everybody else could feed off, and have this single network operator that did all of that everybody else piggybacked off? Because what we're seeing now is everybody doing the same blooming thing over and over and over again.
So I think it's an unfair challenge to Telkom, because in essence, you know, they've had legacy infrastructure. They had a copper network in the ground. Billions of rands had been spent over many years putting that network in place. And admittedly, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, an ADSL connection would have been absolutely suitable for the ultimate purpose. As you move into high definition content, suddenly ADSL becomes a little bit restrictive in terms of downloading and uploading. And therein creates a demand for fibre type infrastructure. So I think a company like Telkom and maybe some of the other network operators as well have got challenges in terms of having to earn a return on capital on investment in existing infrastructure, whereas the technology has evolved and there's a need for new investment in newer and faster technologies.
But it comes to the obsolescence of technology, doesn't it? I mean, we were 15 years ago downloading on copper, then we went to ADSL, now we're on fibre. These guys have got to make a buck, and make a buck fast, before even fibre becomes obsolete.
Absolutely, and once again, it's an incredible challenge for a capital-intensive industry, right? So you've got the passive network, so it's the fibre, it's the copper, it's the towers, and then you've got the active network, which is then connecting sort of and using the various channels. The issue is, from a capital efficiency perspective, does it make sense for the mobile operators, the incumbent fixed line operators, to actually own all of the infrastructure, whether it's passive or active? And one of the things I would potentially argue for is maybe a greater level of sharing, which we're currently seeing in the passive network, but that actually moving into the active network as well.
It's hardly surprising that it costs so much to use data in South Africa, based on the fact that every year about 20, 30 billion rand even is spent by the service providers in just keeping their networks up to speed. If they could piggyback, if they could share, if they could partner without upsetting the competition authorities and without building up new monopolies, that surely would be good for everybody.
Absolutely, that is certainly my personal view, right? And I'm certainly not arguing for a monopolistic type provider. I think that is inefficient. We've seen the years of Telkom operating as a monopoly, and that was not efficient for the country. But certainly, driven by market forces, driven by market efficiency, a wholesale open access type network can certainly work for the common good of the industry and for the country, but it needs to be driven by market forces.
And I mean, these are the so-called WOANs, the wholesale open access networks. Who would create a wholesale open access network? Would that be government run? Would it be private sector run? Would it be cooperative?
So it's interesting, because government is articulating for either government owning a stake in a WOAN, or potentially influencing who ultimately does own a WOAN. But in my view, you've got examples of, for example, subsea cables that are multi-operator owned. Okay, so why can we not have a similar concept, right? Facilitated by government, but certainly not controlled by government. And I think in that type of context, and government and the regulator in particular, pushing the industry towards collaboration around the active network, I think that takes us into a completely different space in terms of the provision of service.
We talk about space, and we're seeing all kinds of people launching satellites into space and networks of internet service provision coming via satellite, and thousands of hunks of metal floating about the stratosphere. I mean, is that the future? Is that the way we're going to solve this problem? Is by people like Elon Musk, people like Google launching satellites and beaming their signals down to us?
I think ultimately technology has the potential to take us there. So what you're referring to is, for example, low orbit microsatellites, or the Google Loon project, which has already proven itself, and seemingly it seems to be a viable concept. I think essentially the next layer of disruption is not having physical infrastructure in the ground, digging up pavements, or towers having to propel signals across the terrain. Completely wireless type technologies are the next evolution, and I think the disruption that you talk about, I think is going to be exciting for us all to see, and in our lifetimes.
There's a wonderful case study on Loon, though, because Loon is short for balloon, and it's the technology that was used in Puerto Rico. After the recent terrible storms that came through Puerto Rico, infrastructure was destroyed, needed connectivity in a hurry, and Google went in, floated a balloon up, and beamed signal down, and people were connected. It made the difference, I'm sure, between life and death.
Absolutely, and I think that is a very good example of necessity giving rise to innovation, right? So the Loon concept existed, but I think that particular situation gave Google the opportunity to prove the concept. And I think it also gave them the confidence to then try it in other areas as well. So in the not too distant future, I think the interesting thing to see is how that evolves, and whether the Loon potentially poses a threat to the mobile network operators as we know them.
So next time I see a man with a spade digging up the pavement outside my house and he's got a big roll of cable, do I stop him and say, dude, this technology is going to be out and be superfluous within 2 to 5 years because you're going to be overtaken, please don't waste your money throwing this cable into the ground and digging up my pavement again? Or does fibre have a longer runway, do you think?
I think fibre has an incredibly long runway ahead of it, right? So there's lots of debate around, does 5G replace fibre? Again, my view is that it doesn't. I think as we're seeing now, Telkom's still operating a copper network, right? They are still ADSL and VDSL subscribers. So fibre certainly has, a 5, 10, 15-year time horizon where it can be a viable solution for broadband connectivity. But certainly in that time frame, you're going to see other levels of disruption come through that makes, that creates new technologies, new opportunities. But I think for as long as capital has been invested in a project, for example, to deliver fibre, I think the operators are going to try to prolong the life for as long as possible to ensure that they earn a decent return on capital.
Telecommunications expert Premeshin Naidoo, thank you very much indeed. He is with Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, where he is the head of TMT. The future of technology is wide open, lots of opportunity, lots of excitement, and thank goodness those cables have got a long lifespan. It would have been awful to have all of that disruption for nothing. Thanks for watching.